A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You know, Herman, I was looking at the alerts on my phone at 3 a.m. last night, and it hit me. There is this massive widening chasm between what the headlines are saying and what people are actually feeling when they are staring at the ceiling of a reinforced room in the middle of the night. Today's prompt from Daniel is about that exact dissonance as we hit the 5-week mark of this conflict with Iran. We are seeing a total divergence in narratives between Washington and Jerusalem, all while the civilian population is hitting a wall of pure physical exhaustion.
It is a critical moment, Corn. We have moved past that initial shock and awe phase where adrenaline carries everyone through the day. Now, we are in the grit. And by the way, for everyone listening, today's episode of My Weird Prompts is powered by Google Gemini 1.5 Flash. I'm Herman Poppleberry, and I've been digging into the logistics of this abated rocket volume everyone is talking about. It's a bit of a statistical trap.
Right, because abated sounds like it's over, but if you're the one running to a shelter 4 times a day, the math doesn't really matter to your nervous system. It's like telling someone who's being poked in the eye every hour that at least they aren't being poked every 5 minutes. It's still a poke in the eye.
That is exactly the issue. The numbers say the volume is down, but the tactical reality is shifting toward a grinding war of attrition. We are seeing a massive gap between the strategic victory narrative coming out of official briefings and the lived experience of billions of people. In the US, the Trump administration is talking about an off-ramp and maximum pressure as if this is a negotiation that's almost wrapped up. Meanwhile, in Israel, the messaging is still focused on an existential threat that requires total indefinite mobilization.
It's the democracy dilemma, as some are calling it. How do you keep a modern, high-tech society functioning when the normal has been deleted for over a month? You've got the US saying no deal needed to end the war, but then you've got reports of dwindling weapon stockpiles and the realization that regime change in Tehran isn't something you just check off a list in a weekend.
And that brings us to the core of Daniel's prompt. If a government is fighting a war on behalf of its citizens, what is the responsibility to actually tell those citizens the truth about the timeline? Is the lack of transparency a military necessity to keep the enemy guessing, or is it a failure of leadership that's going to cause a domestic collapse from the inside out?
Let's start with those narratives, because the daylight between the US and Israel right now is getting pretty bright. Washington seems to be looking for a way to declare mission accomplished on the nuclear front and pull back, while Jerusalem is looking at the long-term missile threat and saying, if we stop now, we're just waiting for the next October 7th or April 14th, but on a much larger scale.
The US narrative is very much focused on the kinetic plateau. They see the strikes on the Isfahan steel plants and the degradation of the IRGC's immediate launch capabilities as a win. From the White House perspective, if you've neutralized the immediate nuclear breakout potential and smacked the industrial base, you've restored deterrence. But from the Israeli perspective, deterrence is a psychological state, not just a count of destroyed launchers. If the sirens are still going off in Tel Aviv and Haifa, deterrence hasn't been restored, it's just been modified.
And that modification is what's killing the home front. We saw this on April 2nd just yesterday. There was a rocket barrage on Haifa. Now, the official report says low volume. If you look at a chart, it looks like a tiny blip compared to the first week of March. But one of those low-volume rockets hit a desalination plant. Now you've got water rationing in a major city. So the narrative says the threat is abated, but the reality for a mom in Haifa is that she can't give her kid a bath, and she's still spent 3 hours in a bomb shelter.
But Corn, think about the cascading effect of that one low-volume hit. It's not just the water. When a desalination plant goes offline, the energy grid has to compensate, the local hospitals have to switch to emergency reserves, and suddenly the abated threat has created a logistical nightmare that costs tens of millions of dollars to fix. It's a precision strike on the national psyche. The government says we intercepted 95%, but the 5% that got through hit the jugular of the city's infrastructure.
It's the difference between a statistic and a shower. How does a government bridge that? If you're the spokesperson, do you admit that the low-volume attack was actually a strategic disaster? Or do you keep the victory narrative going to prevent a run on bottled water at the supermarkets?
That is the payload to cost ratio shift I've been looking at. In the beginning, Iran and its proxies were trying for saturation attacks, thousands of cheap rockets to overwhelm the Iron Dome. Now they are shifting. They are launching fewer projectiles, but they are more sophisticated, or they are aimed at critical infrastructure nodes. It's a more efficient way to maintain a state of war without burning through their entire remaining stockpile in 3 days. They are playing for the long game, which is the definition of attrition.
It's a psychological siege. If I can send you to a shelter at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and 10 a.m., I have effectively shut down your economy and your sanity. It doesn't matter if I only use 3 drones to do it. The cost to the attacker is maybe $50,000. The cost to the defender in lost wages, fuel for interceptors, and psychological trauma is in the millions.
And the financial stress is becoming the secondary front of the war. The Israeli Finance Ministry is putting out these macroeconomic projections, saying growth for 2026 will still be around 3.3%. But that is such a cold, detached number. It doesn't account for the small business owner who has been closed for 5 weeks because his employees are all on reserve duty or can't get to work because of the alerts. It doesn't account for the just-in-time mobilization costs.
Right, and it's not just the soldiers. It's the parents who can't work because schools are closed or operating on a limited basis. It's the soaring costs of everything because shipping is disrupted. When you have an endless disrupted life, your savings evaporate. The government can talk about total victory all they want, but if you can't pay your mortgage because the economy has ground to a halt, victory starts to feel like a very abstract concept.
I was actually looking at some data from the 2006 Lebanon War to compare. Back then, the economic dip was sharp but V-shaped. People knew it was a matter of weeks, but here we're entering the second month of a conflict with no clear geography. Is the front in Isfahan? Is it in the Galilee? Is it in the Red Sea? When the front is everywhere, the economy has nowhere to hide.
And that leads to the democracy dilemma we mentioned. In a democracy, the government needs the consent of the governed to continue a high-intensity conflict. If the public feels like they are being fed everything is fine, we are winning line, while their daily reality is one of fear and financial ruin, they stop trusting the briefings. We saw this with the Homefront Command app on April 1st. There was a barrage, and the app was lagging or giving conflicting data. People were standing in hallways wondering if it was safe to leave, while the official word was just, stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant is the thoughts and prayers of wartime communication. It's meaningless when people need to know, is my city going to be functional in 3 weeks? Should I be looking for a way to move my family further south? Is there a light at the end of this tunnel, or is this just the new normal for the next 2 years?
But, Herman, isn't there a risk in being too all-transparent? If the IDF comes out and says, look, we're running low on Tamir interceptors for the Iron Dome, and we expect the water rationing in Haifa to last until August, doesn't that just give the IRGC a roadmap for their next move? Doesn't it tell them exactly where the pressure points are?
That's the classic military argument for opacity. Don't feed the enemy's BDA battle damage assessment. But in 2026, the enemy doesn't need a government press release. They have commercial satellite imagery, they have social media feeds of people filming their empty taps in Haifa, and they have SIGINT. The IRGC knows the water is off. The only people being kept in the dark by a lack of transparency are the citizens who are supposed to be supporting the war effort. You end up in a situation where the enemy knows more about your domestic fragility than your own voters do.
Historically, Israel has been very good at short, sharp conflicts. The Six-Day War, obviously. Even the 1973 war, as traumatic as it was, had a clear trajectory of recovery. But this, This feels more like the War of Attrition from 1967 to 1970, or even the Scud missile period in 1991, but with the technological intensity of 2026. In 91, the public endured because it was a fixed period with a clear external ally, the US handling the bulk of the offensive. Here, Israel is the primary actor, and the target is much, much larger.
And the enemy has learned. Tehran knows they don't have to win a conventional battle. They just have to outlast the Israeli public's patience and the US election cycle. President Pezeshkian has been very clever with his recent rhetoric, appealing directly to the US public, asking them why their tax dollars are being used to keep Israeli citizens in shelters. It's a classic propaganda play to split the alliance, and it works better when the alliance doesn't have a unified narrative.
It's interesting you mention the US election cycle. We're seeing Trump lean into this. I can settle this in 24 hours persona again. But the reality on the ground is that settling it might mean leaving a massive, simmering threat right on Israel's doorstep. If Washington forces an off-ramp before the missile infrastructure in western Iran is truly neutralized, they're essentially asking Israel to accept a permanent state of high alert.
Well, not exactly, but you hit on the point. The divergence is the vulnerability. If Trump says the job is done and Netanyahu says the job is just beginning, the space between those two statements is where Iran finds its leverage. It's also where the Israeli public finds its anxiety. If your greatest ally thinks you're finished, but your government says you're still in mortal danger, who do you believe?
It's the information gap that Daniel mentioned. There is a rising frustration about the lack of a day after plan, and I think we need to talk about what that looks like on the ground. When you transition from a crisis to a grinding conflict, your communication strategy has to change. You can't just have a general in a uniform getting on TV every night saying we struck X number of targets. People want to know about the desalination plant. They want to know why the water is being rationed and when it will be fixed.
That's the utility gap we've discussed before. Mainstream media and official briefings focus on the big movements, the strikes on Isfahan, the diplomatic cables, but the utility for the citizen is in the micro details. Can I drive to work on the Route 2 today? Is the port of Haifa actually open for imports? When the government fails to provide that granular, data-driven transparency, people fill the void with rumors on Telegram or WhatsApp, and that's where the panic starts.
Have you seen those Telegram groups lately? It's wild. You'll have one post saying the Arrow 3 system is out of missiles, followed by another saying a ceasefire is being signed in Oman in 10 minutes. It's pure information warfare, and it thrives in the silence left by official sources.
It also leads to alert fatigue. We've seen this in every long-term conflict. Eventually, people stop running to the shelter. They start weighing the statistical probability of a hit against the annoyance of getting out of bed. And in a war where the enemy is using higher payload, more precise missiles, that fatigue is deadly. If the government isn't honest about the evolving nature of the threat, they are basically setting their citizens up for a disaster born of boredom and exhaustion.
It's like that boiling frog analogy. In the first week, a single siren in Tel Aviv was a national event. By week 5, people are sitting on their balconies with a glass of wine watching the interceptions. They think they've mastered the war, but the IRGC is just waiting for that exact moment of complacency to change the flight path or the warhead type.
There's a technical side to this, alert fatigue too. The Iron Dome, David Sling, the Arrow system, they are marvels of engineering, but they are not a set it and forget it solution. Every interception is a data point. The IRGC is watching how we intercept. They are looking for the blind spots. When the volumes abate, they aren't just giving up, they are calibrating. They are looking for the intermittent trauma sweet spot where they can cause maximum disruption with minimum expenditure.
So, what does the government do to ease this? Because you can't just print money to solve the financial stress that leads to inflation, which is another form of attrition. And you can't just tell everyone to relax, because they clearly can't.
It starts with shifting from crisis communication to sustained engagement. Instead of these vague, heroic proclamations, you need a transparent, data-driven dashboard for the home front. Tell people the truth. We expect this level of disruption to continue for the next 3 months. Here is the specific financial aid package for small businesses in the North. Here is the plan for decentralized schooling. You have to treat the civilian population like partners in the effort, not like children who need to be shielded from the bad news.
But, Herman, how does the government do that without sounding like they've given up on a quick victory? If you tell a business owner that this will last 3 more months, doesn't that just trigger a mass exodus of capital? Won't people just pack up and move to Cyprus or Greece?
Some might, but the ones who stay will be the ones who can actually plan for the long haul. Uncertainty is a much bigger driver of capital flight than a known, difficult timeline. If I know I have to hold on for 90 days, I can talk to my bank, I can adjust my inventory, I can manage my staff. If I'm told victory is tomorrow every day for a month and it never comes, that's when I close the shop and leave for good because I've lost faith in the system's ability to predict reality.
It's about agency. If I know the plan, I can plan. If I'm just waiting for the next siren to tell me what to do, I have no agency. And when you lose agency, you lose the will to support the war. This is the democratic dilemma in a nutshell. An autocratic regime like the one in Tehran doesn't care if its people are exhausted. They will just crack down on any dissent. A democracy doesn't have that luxury, nor should it. The public's endurance is the strategic depth.
And that depth is being tested by the transition to a grinding phase. We're seeing indicators of this in the military data too. Reduced sortie rates from the IAF, a shift toward maintenance and logistics over target acquisition. It's the sound of a military settling in for a long winter. But the home front hasn't been told to settle in. They are still standing by the door with their coats on, waiting for the all clear that isn't coming.
It reminds me of that old saying, war is long periods of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. But when the boredom part is actually financial ruin and intermittent sirens, it's not really boredom. It's a slow-motion catastrophe. We need to look at what's happening in Iran too, because it's not a one-sided exhaustion.
No, the civilian toll in Iran is becoming massive. The strikes on industrial targets, like those Isfahan steel plants we mentioned, they don't just hurt the military. They destroy the energy grid, the job market, the basic infrastructure of life. The psychological impact of missile debris falling in urban areas in Tehran or Shiraz is creating a depleted population there too. But the difference is the feedback loop. In Israel, that depletion turns into political pressure on the government. In Iran, it turns into a desperate, simmering resentment that the regime tries to channel toward the external enemy.
You have to wonder about the fun fact of the day here. Did you know that during the Iran-Iraq War, the War of the Cities phase actually led to a massive internal migration in Iran that permanently changed the demographics of their urban centers? We might be seeing a 21st century version of that, where the educated elite in Tehran are looking for any way out, while the regime uses the rubble to radicalize the rural base.
It's a race to see whose society breaks first. And if history has taught us anything, it's that you can't win a war of attrition just by having better missiles. You win it by having a more resilient social fabric. Right now, the lack of transparency in the U.S.-Israel narrative is fraying that fabric.
I want to go back to the desalination plant in Haifa for a second, because it's such a perfect example of this narrative gap. The official line was low-volume attack, but the consequence was water rationing. If you are a citizen and the government says the attack was minor, but you can't turn on your tap, you feel gaslit. You start to wonder what else they are downplaying. Are the interceptor stockpiles lower than they say? Is the decapitation of the IRGC leadership less effective than they claimed?
Well, yes. Once you lose trust in the minor details, you lose trust in the major ones. This is why the democracy dilemma is so dangerous. In an effort to maintain morale, governments often end up undermining the very thing that builds long-term resilience, truth.
Let's talk about the off-ramp for a second. If Trump is pushing for a deal, what does that deal even look like? Is it a return to the JCPOA? Is it some new Abraham Accords Plus? Because if the Israeli public feels like the war is being ended prematurely for the sake of a U.S. political win, the domestic fallout in Israel will be nuclear, figuratively speaking.
The off-ramp is the most contentious part of the narrative divergence. Washington wants a return to stability because stability is good for markets and oil prices. But Jerusalem sees stability as a trap that allows the IRGC to refine their drone tech and fix the holes in their air defense. There's a real fear that we're moving toward a frozen conflict, where the sirens never truly stop, but the big strikes are vetoed by the White House.
There is also the decision fatigue factor. It's not just the civilians, it's the leadership. When you are in week 5 of a high-intensity conflict, the quality of decision-making starts to dip. You see this in the oscillating rhetoric from the Trump administration. One day it's total victory, the next it's looking for an off-ramp. That inconsistency is a signal of fatigue at the highest levels.
And the IRGC is reading those signals. They're looking for the moment when the US and Israel are so out of sync that they can slip a deal through that lets them rebuild and try again in 5 years. That's the Iranian long game. They don't need to destroy Israel in 2026. They just need to survive 2026 and ensure Israel is too exhausted to stop them in 2031.
Which is why the Israeli narrative of existential security is so focused on not stopping now. But you can't stay in sprint mode for a marathon. If the Israeli government wants to pursue this to the end, they have to shift the country into marathon mode. That means a totally different economic and communication strategy. It means being honest about the grinding nature of what's ahead.
I think we also need to address the reserve duty crisis. We have tens of thousands of Israelis who have been away from their jobs and families for over a month. These aren't just soldiers, they are the heart of the tech sector, the legal system, the medical field. You can't run a startup nation when the founders are sitting in a tank in the Golan for 6 weeks straight. The human capital attrition is just as dangerous as the missile attrition.
So, what are the practical takeaways here? If you're a listener in Israel, or even in the US watching this unfold, what do you do with this realization that the narrative and reality are diverging?
First, you have to acknowledge the mechanism of alert fatigue. It's a physical reality, not a moral failing. You have to build routines that allow for normalcy within the disruption. For governments, the takeaway is even more urgent: shift to sustained engagement. Stop the heroic briefings and start the data-driven updates. If there's water rationing, explain why, how long it will last, and what the plan is to fix it. Transparency is a force multiplier for resilience.
And for the citizens, it's about demanding that transparency. It's about not settling for victory is near, when you can see the desalination plant is smoking. Resilience isn't just about toughing it out. It's about having the information you need to adapt. If the government won't give you the day after plan, the public has to start forcing that conversation.
We are seeing the limits of air power and high-tech defense. You can have the best interceptors in the world, like the Arrow and David's Sling, and they are doing incredible work. Interception rates are still high. But an interception is still an explosion in the sky over a city. It's still debris falling on a factory. It's still a siren. You cannot intercept your way out of a war of attrition. You have to resolve the underlying strategic conflict, or you have to outlast the enemy's will to continue.
But Herman, how do you resolve a conflict with an entity that views your very existence as the problem? If the underlying strategic conflict is existential, doesn't that mean the only resolution is the total collapse of one side or the other?
That's the grim reality of the 2026 conflict. It's why the grinding phase is so terrifying. It's not a border dispute, it's a clash of systems. And in a clash of systems, the one with the most transparent, adaptable, and resilient domestic front usually wins. If Israel tries to fight this like an autocracy, with top-down, opaque messaging, it loses its competitive advantage as a democracy.
And outlasting is a domestic game. It's a game of mortgages, school schedules, and mental health. If we don't pay attention to the home front as a strategic front, the front line won't matter. You can win every battle in the skies over Isfahan and still lose the war in the streets of Haifa and Tel Aviv because the social contract snapped.
That is the most sobering part of this 5th week. The kinetic plateau is a dangerous place to be. It feels like a stalemate, but it's actually a slow-motion test of national character. And in 2026, with the speed of information and the intensity of the weapons involved, that test is more grueling than it's ever been.
It's like we're watching a heavyweight fight where both guys are just leaning on each other in the 12th round. Neither one is going down, but they are both bleeding out. The question is, who has the stronger corner and who has the better why to keep standing?
And right now, the corner. The governments and their communication teams are failing to give the fighters, the civilians, the honest assessment they need to stay in the ring. They are whispering, "He's almost down," when the guy is clearly still punching.
Well, on that cheery note, I think we've deconstructed the narrative enough for one day. It's a lot to process, especially when the reality is literally vibrating in your pocket with every new alert.
It's the reality of modern war. There is no away anymore. The home front is the front line. And if we don't treat it with the same tactical respect we give to a fighter jet or a missile battery, we are going to see some very dark outcomes.
We should probably move toward the wrap-up, but I keep thinking about that desalination plant. It's such a perfect metaphor for the whole thing. You can intercept 99% of the rockets, but that 1% that gets through and hits the water supply, that's the one that changes the narrative of the whole war for the people living through it.
Well, yes. It's the utility of the strike. The IRGC doesn't need to destroy the IDF, they just need to make life in Israel unbearable. And if the government's response to unbearable is to say, actually, it's fine, the gap between those two things is where the collapse happens.
We've spent a lot of time on the how of this war, but the how long is what everyone is actually asking, and the answer seems to be longer than you've been told, but hopefully shorter than the enemy thinks.
That's about as honest an assessment as you can get right now. The intensive kinetic phase might be plateauing, but the prolonged grinding conflict is just warming up. We have to be ready for the long haul.
We should also mention the regional players here. Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. They are all watching this democracy dilemma play out. They are looking to see if a democratic state can actually sustain a war of attrition against a revolutionary theocracy. If they see the Israeli home front cracking, their own strategic calculus changes overnight.
That's a great point. The narrative of strength isn't just for the citizens, it's for the neighbors. But true strength isn't a press release, it's a functional economy and a high morale population. You can't fake that for 5 months.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. It's a lot we know, but these are the conversations we have to have if we're going to understand the world as it actually is, not just as it's presented to us in 30-second clips.
And a big thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the wheels on this thing while we go down these rabbit holes. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Huge thanks to Modal as well for providing the GPU credits that power this show and allow us to do these deep dives every week. We couldn't do it without that back-end support.
If you're finding these discussions valuable, or if they're helping you make sense of the chaos, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app. It genuinely helps us reach more people who are looking for this kind of depth.
You can find all our previous episodes and subscribe to the RSS feed over at myweirdprompts.com. We're also on Telegram. Just search for My Weird Prompts to get notified the second a new episode drops.
Stay safe out there, everyone. Keep asking the hard questions, and don't be afraid to look past the official narrative.
Catch you in the next one. Bye.
Take care.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes